Hello and welcome to this webinar, 5 little-known insights to choosing the right project management software. This event is brought to you by Engineering News Record and sponsored by Trimble Project Site. Hi, I'm Scott Seltz, publisher of ENR and your moderator for today's webinar, and thank you for joining us. Construction management software is a wide-ranging term representing many different types of softwares and products. Without transparency from the provider, contractors can find themselves wasting time and money on the wrong solution. When considering a construction project management software, it's critical that contractors dig below the surface and explore critical aspects in a provider that you might not have examined before. Today, we'll discuss those 5 insights that contractors must consider when looking for the best fit in a solutions provider. Please join me in welcoming today's presenters, Dan Connery, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Trimble, and Benjamin Crosby, Director of BIM and VDC at Yates Construction. Throughout his 24 years career, Dan Connery has leveraged a unique blend of backgrounds from architect, engineering and construction industry, project and program management, and software industry to position tech companies for growth. As Director of VDC at Yates Construction, Benjamin Crosby has overseen implementation of VDC for over 300 projects, has had significant influence in his company's lean journey, and is currently the Yates Company's productivity champion. Now, before we begin today's presentation, please enjoy this brief instructional video on how to use your webinar console.
Welcome to this webinar. Before we begin the presentation, I want to provide you with a few housekeeping items. On your screen, you will see a taskbar with icons. Each icon is assigned to a particular element of today's webinar. Click on the person icon to learn more about today's speakers. Throughout the presentation, you can network with others or submit questions to the speakers in the Q&A and chat box next to the slides. Download resources from the cloud icon. After the webinar is over, please take our survey to tell us how we did. Today's event is being recorded and archived and will be available within 24 hours. For on-demand questions or comments, send us an email by clicking Need Help? Email us. If you experience any technical issues today, please refresh your browser by hitting F5 for PC or Command R for Mac. And now I'm excited to turn it over to today's moderator.
Don't forget to submit your questions during the program, and later our presenters will address as many as possible. Today's event is being recorded and archived on enr.com/webinar, so you can share this presentation with your colleagues. Now I'm excited to turn it over to today's first presenter, Dan Connery. Dan?
Thank you, Scott. So I've been looking forward to this webinar for quite a while because Benjamin and I, when we were talking about it, decided that we want to do something a little bit different. So rather than sitting down and potentially boring you, though I would never accuse Benjamin of being boring and slide deafing you, we decided that what we want to do is just kind of take each one of the 5 areas, have them as a backdrop, and then Benjamin's going to go ahead and share his thoughts. So a little bit before I launch into our first poll to give Benjamin some context of who we have on the call, I want to give you a little bit of context to how we arrived at this point. And Yates Construction, when we went through the sales process, was a reintroduction to me personally back into the general contractor market. I had started with general contractors, and then for almost over a decade, just over a decade, I worked with architects and engineers. And then I started working with owners, and now I'm back to contractors. And I realized I really, really enjoy working with general contractors, kind of salt of the earth people. What I love is these are typically family-owned, closely held businesses who really integrate themselves well into their communities. And I've always felt kind of a stewardship as a software provider to make sure that we're aiding these companies into doing what they do well. And so anyways, I had a really great experience with Yates, Benjamin specifically. And so as part of that sales process, unbeknownst to Benjamin, these 5 points kind of got reintroduced to me. as far as things that we shouldn't forget as software companies. We like to talk about our products, love to talk about our products. And sometimes we forget about the things that really don't have anything to do with our products, but what type of company are we? So anyways, just want to give you a little bit of that background. The point is not for me to talk for the next 45 minutes. Benjamin's going to do most of that for us. So the goal is we're going to have a backdrop of each one of the 5 sections. We have polls. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and fill out that poll. The other component, Benjamin really asked me to encourage you, ask your questions in each section. And what Benjamin will do is weave in his answer as part of his conversation. So anyways, with that, enough for me. I'm going to go ahead and actually launch our first poll. So I'm going to give everyone about 30 seconds to look through the list of responses in here. And basically what we want to understand is today, what are you using to help manage your projects? So if everybody could pick from one of the options, then we will go ahead and hand it over to Benjamin, and we'll hit our first discussion topic, which I'll go back to that slide, but just so everybody recalls, we're going to talk about making sure the software is built for you as a contractor. All right, so I'm going to move forward, and so we can see the results. That 20% are Procore users. Well over 60, so 68%, well over 60% are using something other than what we have listed. So that's fantastic. I'm going to go back and remind folks that the first question, let me go back. The first topic that we want to hit on is what type of organization was your software built for? So Benjamin, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Excited to be here. That's something who it was built for came to kind of be a core when you're going through a selection process and going through this. As a general contractor, then I end up interfacing with lots of different project management softwares because sometimes the owner says, hey, we're using this one, we have to use it. Or sometimes the architect has already picked one. Sometimes with joint ventures, then the joint venture partner already has one. And so each of those comes with its own kind of perspective on what kind of data they're looking at, how it's being saved, and how the interface is. And so knowing that something was built for a general contractor and being used for the general contractor can be very beneficial. I think one of the main things in that sticks out to me is that the general contractor ends up being in the middle most of the time. Right? The owner and the architect are interfacing through the general contractor, and then you have all of the trade contractors that participate as well. And being able to be in the middle and have something that's built to be that hub of information to where all these different parties can interface, I think is significant and important in how that comes together. I guess I've seen a couple different times in the past where, hey, we're going to use this software solution, and we start down that road, and then we say, hey, we need to get our trade contractors on board. And I've had both architect engineering firms and owners say, well, no, this isn't for them. We can't have that many users. We can't have them participate. This is just for us to talk to you as a general contractor. And that kind of breaks the communication cycle a little bit because lots of times the RFIs, the submittals, most of those are being generated by the trade contractors. And they need to be vetted by the general contractor. But if they can't come and participate, then you start to have difficulties. And so, oh, I thought you were going to say something, Dan. Okay. All right. So, and then another aspect of that is whether you are using primarily a drawing process or you're making the transition to a BIM VDC process where you're focusing heavily on models, having that intermediate source of information, right? That your project management system is there in the middle and can manage that drawing set and manage that set of models. That is very important. And then, as someone just pointed out in the chats, what about commissioning management? That falls into that same group there for commissioning management. is that a lot of that information is going to be coming from the trade contractors and has to feed to every other group. And so you want to make sure that the architect has easy review of that and the owner has easy review of that. But the vast majority of that information is coming from the trades. And so having a consolidated set of documents that's coming from the architects and engineers that then can match up with shop drawings and shop models and our coordination process that's coming from the trades, commissioning information that's coming from the trades, or even a consultant. You have a dedicated commissioning agent that is reviewing everything, an important part of the process. So we have to keep that in mind. So asking a vendor, who is this built for? I've worked with some that were built for the architect and engineer. And what generally happens is they have a harder time with the RFI submittals and a model process. They do well with publishing the drawings out, but sometimes they don't do as well with kind of marking up and as built in those drawings as they go. I've dealt with some that it's coming from the owner's perspective. And when it comes from the owner's perspective, the things that I found difficult are that the owner isn't necessarily as worried about the details. They're more worried about the relationship with the architect and the general contractor. And then there's all of those details, and they'll be like, oh no, we don't want to see every RFI, and we don't want to see every submittal and all those sort of things. And so when it comes from the owner's perspective, they're more worried about a pro forma. They're worried about 5 different projects and seeing some stats on the projects and making sure everything's running smooth. And so those details then get lost. Those details are what makes the construction process go. That's what really pulls it together and gives everybody their instruction on how they're going to make all this happen. And so, and then I've also had the opportunity to work with software that was built from a trade contractor perspective. And the trade contractor perspective, they have the details there and they have the drawing sets there, but when it's from the trade contractor perspective, it doesn't quite get the interaction that you need. It's really, it's got to be able to have multiple options and multiple flows. And so when it's from the trade contractor perspective, lots of times you'll see it written as, hey, the trade contractor asks an RFI and they get an answer back. And when in reality, it usually has to get asked and then get routed to maybe an architect who's going to send it to a consultant and then back to the architect, and then the architect sometimes will vet that past an owner or come back. And so knowing how it's built and seeing how deep your workflows go, that's part of why it's easier if it's the hub as a general contractor, because then it doesn't have to go as deep. It can branch out. If it starts at one of the other spots, it has to get pretty deep to get back through to everyone. And that makes it a little bit more difficult. Dan, did you have some insights in there?
No. In fact, I think that's a perfect level of detail, at least for now. On this topic, I want to go ahead and move us on to our topic number 2, which is talking about job costing. So you set this up fairly well, Benjamin, as far as drawings, submittals, RFIs. Those are the areas that really impact almost the entire project supply chain. One of the areas that we've seen that a lot of solutions struggle with is then when you get into job costing. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll, and then we'll come back and let Benjamin give his thoughts on job costing specifically. So with that, is improving access to data through technology integrations important to your organization? And we ask that question because we often see that integration with your ERP solution, your accounting solution, is important. So maybe we could just take a couple moments to let us know. You have binary yes, no, but you also have kind of the lukewarm somewhat, or actually you have no idea if it's important.
It is kind of fun to see these roll in, and it's, it's kind of preparation for the rest of the night. I'm sure many people are going to be watching the numbers roll in throughout the evening this evening. So we'll see what happens here.
All right, perfect. So we can see that close to 90% said yes, that those integrations are important. So I'm going to go ahead and roll back to our topic oops, sorry about that. Roll back to our topic. And with that being said, Benjamin, why don't you go ahead and share your thoughts as far as job cost management is concerned?
And so this is another one. It kind of rolls back into who is your software built for and made for. And so as a general contractor, right, this is your lifeblood. You have to make a profit on your projects. You have to make a profit time after time. Otherwise, the company goes out of business. And so this has to be integral with what we have going on. And so if that is job costing, as in keeping track of our own expenses and knowing how much the job cost is and the profit is, then that's kind of the first level. And you really have to have that somewhere. If that is then mixed in and you can be tracking that with all of the rest of your project data, and a project manager or an executive or a superintendent out there on the site has the ability to have a sense of how is my schedule going, how is my quality going, what's my scope of work, where are my drawings, all of that, and how are we doing on our pricing? Is this coming together the right way? Are we going to be profitable on the project? Are we not being productive? If all of that is in one location, then they get a better sense of the job on a regular basis. Now, that first level is them knowing your own cost. Now, the second level is then being able to have some of that real-time information. How much is an RFI going to cost the client? Right? Not just having the RFI, but actually having that as a potential change order and seeing those potential change orders roll to the architect for approval and then on up to the owner so they have an idea of how much their whole job is costing them and how much change is taking place. Rolling that all together, it starts to build trust in the whole project, right? Because if we're just dealing with the submittals on the side and we're just dealing with our drawings, but we're not tracking where that job cost is going, then people are unsure, right? They're like, well, I don't know if I can approve that RFI or if I can approve that right now. How much is it going to cost? How do we roll that together? And so being able to tie that in and have that not only cost, but budget management available and add a degree of transparency to it. Let a trade contractor know, hey, I submitted this RFI, it had this much cost. Currently, the RFI has been answered, but the cost associated is pending. And it's supposed to be reviewed in 4 days. Well, that opens up a level of transparency for that trade contractor and then to say, hey, 4 days is too late, right? In 4 days, that cost will have gone up because work will have rolled over that area. And so being able to keep that open and visible, what that does is it adds flow. It increases the trust on the project. It starts to add flow, and people are able to address issues faster, more timely. They have greater set of information there. And also, when we start to tie it together, and we can tie it together tightly with good connections, what that does is it allows us to make the better decisions because we don't have to go look for something somewhere else. We can go out there and we can get that overall picture at one time, and that transparency and ability to see a greater view makes better decisions across the board. And really, I think the core of every construction company is we want to provide value to our clients. We have to make a profit. We have to be successful to stay in business. But the way to do that is to provide something that the client wants to have, that a client wants to come back to you for. And so if we can eliminate the waste, eliminate the other miscellaneous things that get in the way, and focus on better decisions because we have the information there. It's not just a pile of data that someone has to dig through. It's real information that's usable, actionable, and you can go through it. That just helps us improve all the way around.
Cool. So one of the things that you share with me during the purchase process is configurability. So it seems like in the job costing area around contracts and change orders, et cetera, the ability to configure the software to fit your process as opposed to changing your process to fit the software. Any perspective on that?
Oh, that, yeah. that made it a lot easier, especially for implementation part. When we first were digging into it and looking at it and reviewing multiple different softwares, we were anticipating having to start to change some of our terminology. And so something that we'd always called it would be an item of change or clarification. This is before it's a change order to the owner. This is something that could be changing, or some people might call it a potential change order. But that was ingrained in our company. We've been calling that for many years. And so being able to change that terminology and being able to make that stick with where we were and not having to adjust for the piece of software, that makes life a lot easier, because it's easier to change software than to re-educate people and change people. And so that just makes it that much better. Our trades are familiar with that. We've got a large basis of people that are all used to that process. And it didn't seem like a big thing at first. But then once we got into it and we started realizing how that could be configured and match our normal workflows, then that makes a big difference with getting people on board and moving them and getting them to use it. Because going out there and getting a project management software, and I've had this experience, almost a previous life in the past, right? Totally different experience. But there was the project management software that everyone was supposed to be using, but it really wasn't usable. It didn't do much. One of the big things that was missing was any sort of cost component to it at all. And working with that and realizing how often people, well, we want to use this, because there wasn't much of a differentiation between that and some other piece of software. But when you can start to roll the cost in and all the information is there, and the terminology is familiar, now all of a sudden it's really usable. And members of the company and trade contractors and architects and engineers are like, hey, this is working great. We like this. And that just makes the project that much smoother, because they're really using it. They're not looking for a workaround. They're not defaulting to older practices of just email, things like that, because it works for them and their situation.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and I just remember that was something actually that you all shared with us, was that we didn't do as good a job as we could have explaining how configurable the system is to how you run your business, because we just assumed all software was like that. And we learned that that's not necessarily true. So perfect. All right, I want to move on to topic number 3, which is, and you actually touched on this a little bit, which is why I didn't ask you some of my questions earlier, which is support for connected construction. So the ability to connect, earlier we asked about connecting internally. So for example, we're going through an integration process with Yates between the project site solution and their ERP product, which happens to be another Trimble solution. But we have this vision of connecting the supply chain. So connecting, you mentioned the trades have their own software, the architects have their own software. It's how do we connect all this stuff? So I'm going to start again with a poll. So I'll bring that up. And so improving access to data. Oops.
Next one.
Oh, it looks like the poll got duplicated. Okay, so what I'd ask you to do, we can use the same poll question, that's fine, is whether or not with your internal systems, but for example, the ability to integrate with your subcontractor, or your ability to integrate with your design partners, or ability to integrate with your owner, so that, and I have this crazy vision that one day an RFI gets entered into one system. So for example, the trade enters it into their system, and then it just flows between the systems, irrespective of if you bought those systems all from the same software company. So I'm going to go ahead and move back to our question, and just, Benjamin, have you talk about this, because this is an area where you and I have had some conversations over the last several months, and your thoughts about enter data once and reuse multiple times.
Yes, that idea of, and I have a friend that I've done presentations with before. He referred to it as moving from a paper locker to a digital locker. Right, the information was just in one location and hard to get to, and so having looking for a solution that then makes that data available to multiple people. So a great example of that, and something that I'm really looking forward to as we move forward, is the idea of tracking the crews and the manpower that was on site each day, because that has to be tracked by the trade contractors, it has to be tracked by the general contractor, and being able to have that in one sort of central location, but it still is easy to access by the trade contractor. They can still input it in whatever system they're talking about. And I know you used an RFI for an example. The RFI might be one of the easiest ones to get to make that happen. Something like crew and equipment management are some of the ones that I'm really looking forward to in the future, where they take their roll call in the morning and they mark who's here. Maybe not even a roll call anymore. I mean, really connected construction where that person walks on site and they're running through the RFID tag, or they're scanning a badge, and then it's recording they were there and when they left and all those sort of things, because that starts to connect not just to accounting and payroll, but now we're in safety and we're talking about mustering and being able to know who was on site that day, and being able to check for emergencies, and then also grouping crews. As much as we're feeling the pain of COVID right now, I think it's going to lessen, but I don't anticipate it, and I'm not planning on it going away. I still think we will be trying to group crews for a long period of time and having this group of 5 people work together on a regular basis and not shifting them from one to the next. I mean, actually, just for productivity's sake, we should have been doing that for years probably. And so, but trying to pull those together and see those connections reach out beyond a piece of individual software, something that's easy to get through. I think we've kind of learned that from our cell phones, right? We can have a single cell phone and we can, hey, get this app, and kind of pull things together. That same idea of being able to pull this information and have it there and usable, I think is going to make a big difference. Especially like if I'm getting deep into my BIM VDC world here, and you start talking about models for machine control, which is basically BIM for construction equipment. They've been doing it for 20, 30 years. They just didn't call it BIM, right? They didn't realize those models were the exact same thing, but they're fabrication, LOD 400 level models that are now readily accessible in my project management software, that are now federated and combined with the rest of my my models, my architectural, my structural, and I can see all of my civil and all of my grading comes into play with the building. And in that same platform, it's easy to get them from that Trimble platform in Connect to the machine itself that actually reads them and is grading or excavating or digging a trench, whatever needs to be taking place. That sort of deep connection is the stuff that also gets me really excited, because that means real productivity, real effort coming into that.
You know, one of the things. No, please go ahead, Benjamin.
No, I just verifying I'd head down the right road for the conversation today.
Yeah, and then one of the things that we've also talked about in the past around, you talked about crews, so timesheets.
Oh, yeah.
For years, all I've heard is complaints about filling out timesheets. By the way, architects have the same complaint, filling out timesheets, trying to assign time to projects, and how can you make it easier to enter timesheets? And my question always was, why are you filling out timesheets? It should just be automated. And then we talked about weather. So there are companies out there that are looking to auto capture weather. One of the retorts from contractors is, just because that's the weather on weather.com doesn't mean that's what's happening in my project. But now you have sensors that can give you weather within feet of where that sensor is. You can drop these things. In fact, you can turn your people into weather stations as they're walking around. Little devices are capturing temperature and pressure and humidity and et cetera. So I think this whole, not just connecting construction so data flows between the supply chain, but also focused on trying to eliminate the data that the people have to capture. Because first, and people that know me well enough will start laughing or smiling, that I have this soapbox against daily reports. The whole concept that daily reports are captured by people. One of my running jokes when I first did my general contractor review is, who likes doing daily reports? Raise your hand. When do daily reports get done? And a lot of people would tell me, now I'm sure it doesn't happen anymore. I'm sure the industry has moved on, but it used to be they were done on Saturday because nobody wants to do them during the week. And I'm thinking, so how accurate is Monday's daily report if you're filling it out by memory on Saturday? And yet, when there's a problem on the project, what's the first document that gets looked at? Daily reports to reconstruct what happened on that project. So I'm super excited about all the advancements that are happening that will hopefully one day make daily reports completely obsolete.
Yeah, and so that road to making them obsolete, like you're talking about, is this other idea. When it was just stuck in a piece of paper, it was a person filling out that daily report. And I think that was the big flaw in the system. Whereas what it should be and what we're doing now is there's multiple people. Right? Even for an individual trade contractor, they can have 2 people or 3 people in the equipment list. One is a idea that we are not trying to consolidate daily reports anymore is a difficult. It showed it lagged.
So,
not very much there, Dan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if you could just, unfortunately, it was just as you were getting wound up with can you just restate that little section again?
So the idea that daily reports shouldn't be a person, right? Daily reports should be multiple people, multiple sources, because not one person knows everything that's taking place on the job site. So 4 different people should be able to take a picture of that day and post it as part of the daily reports to document what was taking place. I mean, I have seen job sites, like you mentioned on the weather. The rainstorm came through, but it really only hit the left side of the job site because that east side that's just where the storm came through, and it dumped a 1/4 inch of rain there and nothing on the other side. And so one half has pictures of muddy footings and the other is fine. So multiple people should be able to take those pictures, upload them, compile that, because that daily report is the core piece of information. If there is a dispute, if there is a problem, that's what we're going to come back to because it was the live, very focus of information. And I summarized that a little bit, not quite as enthusiastic second time through. Hopefully that'll work.
Oh, it's fine. And that's one of the things we're also seeing. We're envisioning entering into an era when you'll have the opportunity to capture everything. So rather than being specific and getting away from filling out forms, because most fields on a form are there because of a problem you ran into on another project. So we better capture that information moving forward. And one of the things I remember from my prior life working with architects and engineers is that these forms have become daunting. And the number of fields you need to fill in are daunting. And a project manager, it actually broke my heart a little bit, said that I don't know what happened, but I don't manage projects anymore. All I do is manage information. And that's not why I got into this career. I want to work with people. I want to solve problems and not just sit there and fill out forms all day long. So anyways, cool.
Along that real quick, I'm going to talk about the checklist function. Before, our checklists were always off on the side, right? Our pre-pour checklist or our wall enclosure checklist for quality, or even our safety checklist for in the morning, right? Our pre-task planning to go through. All of those were kind of separate on. Now those are all coming together and they're done live in the software with the date, and they're right there with the daily report. We don't necessarily take the effort to tie them together because we don't have to, but that now all of a sudden you have that much more detail, granular is right there, and it resolves disputes. People come back a week later and say, well, what about this? We can resolve the dispute and we can get on with getting the project built, which is back to the project management, not chasing the paperwork.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me, God, I'm going to reach 20 years back to what I felt was a very progressive construction company back in the day when it comes to thinking about project management. And one of the ways they bonused their project managers was time to resolution on open items. because their philosophy was the longer you let an item stew, the better chance it's going to become a bigger problem later. And so they really encourage their project managers that if something's identified, sit down with the subcontractor, sit down with the affected parties and solve it in real time rather than kicking it down the road. And now it becomes a claim at the end of the project. So awesome. So let me move on to our fourth and next to last topic, which is the long-term financial outlook and customer stewardship. So one is, how concerned should you be? How concerned was Yates in the long-term viability of Trimble and how we approach our relationships with our customers?
Okay, so this one, I have to use some examples from my BIM BDC background. Go into some seminars, find out that there's some 2,500 new applications, whether that be a phone app or a computer app, created for construction every year. And that was a couple of years ago. There might be more, might be less now, but that is a lot of pieces of software being created. And so even when I started digging in and trying to review them, and I was probably going through about 2 a week or so probably about 100 a year, was really trying to review them and pick out the best ones. What can we use? What can we not use? Early on, then I picked one that I was like, hey, let's start using this and started getting into it. And I guess I was the only person that liked it because a few months later they were gone. They didn't make it through the startup. They didn't make it through. And so now I'd spent all this effort and it wasn't there. And so then I got a little more careful about making sure that, hey, I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to find out, how stable are they? Not really start to implement it till they've been around a few months or a year even. And that was for small commitments. A project management system for your entire company for projects to move forward with, that is a large commitment. And so picking someone that we know is financially stable, that has not only going to be around for a while, but there's a big advantage to having already been around for a while. Because with construction, especially, we have a long turnaround on projects. Sometimes it's, a year, sometimes it's 3 years on turnaround. And you have an even longer turnaround when it comes to issues that show up with a project. Sometimes it's 5 years later. Sometimes it's 7 years later. It's past the statute of limitations. But that homeowners association for the condo still comes back and says, hey, you didn't do this right. And now you have to find your data on it and address the issue. And so that long turnaround, working with a company that's been around for a long time, they understand what things have to be saved and how to go about doing it. Kind of prove it not financially, legally out. What are the legal issues that come around? How do we resolve them? How do we have to have the information to make sure that we avoid those issues? Not just we can resolve them when they come, but actually not have them take place. And so that comes back to, like you said, the focus on the daily reports and making them more real, not waiting till Saturday till someone does them. Making that easy for a superintendent to take care of them early. Making sure that RFIs get real answers, right? What is the process for an RFI that comes back with a half answer? And I see that regularly. And so that having the software company that's built the software that understands those issues and works with that to make sure that, hey, this is working, and not just for the general contractor, it's working for all of the parties so that everyone will put their information there, we'll all be coming together, and to start to be that hub that then protects your company for years to come. I also past experience with a piece of software that got turned off, right? You was there, used it for 3 or 4 years, and we had to stop using it because they were no longer going to support it. It wasn't going to be around anymore. That's also somewhat painful. And so that idea, I know as we were going through one of the comments that I had reviewing the software when we were looking specifically at Trimble and Project Site was when we met with the with your group, is like, hey, they're the knowledgeable ones. They're not just trying something new because someone said try this or try that. They've been there for a long time and had a good sense of how design, construction, operations already functioned. So then the software wasn't trying to recreate some of those workflows. It can improve them where needed, but you don't want to recreate them because contracts aren't necessarily written around some new system. The contracts are written around the proven systems that have been around a long time. We just want to enhance those.
Yeah, I often, one of the things I really love about being at Trimble is it's full of what I call construction nerds like me. I live vicariously through people like Benjamin who actually do the work in the field. But I've been in this industry for 25 years. It's all I know. It's all I care about. It's working in service to people who build just incredible things, infrastructure and buildings and et cetera. So it's just, yeah, Trimble's full of construction nerds.
And me being a productivity junkie, how do we do this better, right? I mean, some of you have seen my title is BIM VDC. I didn't get into BIM VDC because I was a techie. I got into BIM VDC because I was about productivity. And I saw, hey, this can make us bring our bottom line down. This can increase our value to our clients. And so that's where you and our team really clicked, is because we've had that big productivity focus. And I saw, hey, this isn't just a project management software because it's a technology. It was actually a productivity enhancement. And I'd been set kind of on this quest too, because our productivity champions group, when I met groups from Yates Construction, all our divisions, our sister companies, all those, all had people come to a productivity champions group that I was the leader of. We went through that, and the things that we wanted to improve were our scheduling, our usage of lean, and our project management software, because that's what the productivity group saw was the biggest things. Now, schedule and lean are easy because that's time. You're managing time. The project management is managing the information which turned into time, right? If we can get the right information to the right people quickly, we save time and effort on our projects. And so that's kind of where we pull that in there. And like I said, felt like Trimble Project Site Group had that same thought process. We're not here just to sell a technology and to be the cool technology people. We're here to actually change, not change, improve and allow people to collect and distribute the information better, which gets us back to managing projects.
Good. All right. Well, that segues nicely into our final topic, which is price for today's construction economy, right? So 2020 has been let's just say an interesting year, an interesting start to another decade. And so I just like to start with you sharing what it means to make sure that your software providers and other providers understand the economy that you work within.
So that has made lots of interesting conversations this year because generally construction is down across the country, right? And felt a lull. And so then that brought light to, what are you paying for based on a set fee, right? A set amount. What are you paying for that scales with the growth of your company, and you just really have to look at that and see which way we're going. And so the idea of something that kind of scales with your growth. If we get more work and we're more profitable, sure, we can pay some more. That makes sense. We have more work. We're doing better. When it's just a solid set amount, and I'm feeling that pain with some other vendors and stuff right now, is that, we're supposed to pay this set amount no matter what our usage is or anything. And that can be difficult when things slow down. And so that's a part of it, and that's a consideration. And I guess the COVID, you mentioning that with the slowdown made me think of that. But when I'm looking at pricing for today's construction economy, I guess when we came into the pricing and trying to evaluate which software we were going to use, it wasn't just about the low number. It was about value. And there were some very low dollar companies that they were startups. We weren't sure how they'd be around financially in 2 years or 3 years. I'm always a little wary of those that come from a foreign country, from overseas, and want to get into the U.S. market, because the U.S. market builds things differently than they do in most overseas countries. And so we had to scrub a couple of those out. And so if they don't have a module called RFIs, that's a good clue that maybe they're doing something a little bit differently. And so scrub a couple of those out. But then it was about the value. And really, construction's about managing risk. That's what it's always been about. If you have lower risk on a project, if you're a CM agent, then there's less revenue. If you're taking on the higher risk project and you execute it successfully, you have higher revenue. That's what construction, that's the core of what it is. And so looking for the software that best manages your risk. Because if you can manage the risk and take on those other projects that other people might be worried about, or cover yourself so you don't have the errors, right? Make a mistake that costs the company $30,000 or $50,000 because we're managing the information better, we're reducing our risk and we're able to be more profitable. And so really it came down to us when for pricing for today's construction economy was a lot of it was how well is this going to manage our risk? And so a big part of that was the ability to tie in with the financials and track the changes and potential change orders, actual change orders. That was a big risk pool that could be managed, and especially if we pull it all in together. And so then that made the pricing more valuable in what we were doing. I don't expect the risk to get any easier. What's happening is clients are generally asking for their buildings to be built faster. They're looking for bigger projects generally across the board, and they're expecting the same quality that they've had for a number of years. And so if you're able to manage the information and manage that risk better that comes from a faster project, then that's of a bigger value. That's then more important to me and more important to what we do. And so that's something to consider in the pricing and in the search. And then also the pricing mechanism, it's hard to go between them. But I guess the thing to watch out for is if every individual has to pay to play, you don't get the people playing, right? What you need to do is have some sort of pricing mechanism that lets everybody come to the table without individuals having to buy in. And that's what's got me about before on projects is, yes, that trade contractor would have to pay some money to get in, and this one would have to pay some money to get in. Getting through those financial hurdles was always difficult, and people didn't participate. And so I've had some people come back to me, well, then you're paying for them. Yes, we realize we're paying for them because paying for them makes our life better. And if that sounds foreign to you, check out the Nash equilibrium. You won a Nobel Prize for it. But basically, gaming theory says you can help other people, and by helping other people, you help yourself. And that's kind of what I've seen a lot with the project site solution is where it's been it. And if we can work to help everybody, everyone comes out in a better situation than if they broke it down individually.
Cool. So a couple closing thoughts that I have, and then Benjamin, I'll hand it to you for your final closing thoughts. But the story that I tell, again, I mentioned I had a 10-year intervening time between working with contractors. And I remember in 2 prior lives ago, it was the company's largest deal ever, and working with top 10 general contractor in the United States. And the difference between what they paid, and I averaged this over a 10-year life span, because that's about how long I'm used to contractors holding on to their project control solution. 10 years is typically the minimum. We're just starting to roll customers off of a prior platform of ours onto project site after 20 years. So this is going to be a 10 to 20 year investment that you're making. And it's God's honest truth, is just stunning to me that this happened in this industry, especially with what you just mentioned, Benjamin, as far as, construction companies typically were running themselves in a good year at a 4% margin. That'd be like a banner year nowadays.
Yeah.
And this company would have paid in the order of about $1 million over 10 years. And that same company is now paying over $2 million a year. So it went from 1 million over 10 years to 20 million over 10 years. I honestly just don't understand how has project controls gotten 20 times better in that intervening time? No. I'll tell you right now, the answer is no. And then the other part that then corroborated that is we were talking with some recent former employees, and they were talking about internally the terms that are used as we are the Mercedes, we are the BMW, we are the Audi, maybe even we are the Ferrari of project control solution. I'm like, project control should be a Camry at best for a company. It's necessary. You need a good project control solution, but are you going to win business because of the software you use to manage RFIs? I don't think so. But anyways, that's my jaded perspective. Any insight or feedback on that, Benjamin?
That yes, I see that regularly with the new technologies. Is somewhere someone wrote a book or taught a seminar that lots of these technology people attended and said, you find out how much you save people. So if we're going to save them 5%, we're going to charge them 4.5%. And then they're better off and we make the money. And that seems to be pervasive throughout software and technology. And I don't think that applies well to construction, because construction is a risk basis. And that software company, I've yet to have any of them that were taking on the risk. I've not seen any that got paid based on the profitability of the project. They just get paid a set fee. And so because they're not taking in that risk, they need to be, like you said, down there lower. They need to be in the Camry range, or, like you see on construction sites all the time. It's just that pickup truck that's the 3/4 ton truck that you put stuff in the back of, and it's been around a long time, and you just work it and work it and work it to make your money out of it. That's your project management software. Stout, solid, and there. It doesn't need all the bells and whistles. It doesn't need a sunroof. It just, and so at the same time, you want it to be deep and dive into what you needed to do. And so I think that's the difference between bells and whistles and a workhorse is how it performs and what it does. And so I guess everyone always likes to show off, hey, this is how we handle submittals, this is how we handle RFIs. Those are the easy workflows, right? Those are the simple ones, right? Let's get into some of the other ones. Let's dive into, like, say, job costing. Let's dive into the daily reports. Let's dive into the stuff where lots of people are going to be interfacing and pulling through. And let's see if it makes that easier for us and doesn't try to charge us for the world. So those are some of my thoughts there, Dan.
Cool. Awesome. So I think the final question that I have, and then I'll hand it back over to Scott, is just as much as you can share, how's the implementation been going so far?
It's been going really well. Having helped roll out other implementations at other times and other places, then the best one about this one is our individuals in the company are enjoying using the software. We're not having to fight anybody over it. And in the past, I've had to fight them. This is what you have to use. This one, it's like, here, you can use this. And they're like, hey, this is great. We want to use it. And so that has made all the difference in the implementation, in that we've actually had to pull reins and say, we got to test it a little bit first, right? We let our testers go, and our testers then wanted to implement it on their projects. It's like, no, we've got to get our testing done and our configuration done. Like, well, let me test it on my project. Well, we can do that on one, not five. And so that has been a very different experience in rolling it out, that everybody wants to be using it because they find it that much easier. And not just our group, we've had architects and engineers and owners and others that are also like, well, we want to use that. Let's get it going, and how fast can we get that happen? And that's been really nice about Project Site.
Yeah, and I remember you guys explicitly putting that in front of us. We better not have to sell this. It better sell itself. So I'm glad to hear we felt confident that was going to be true. It's good to hear that it actually is true. So I think that's it on my end as far as the questions I had. So Scott, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Dan and Benjamin. That was a really great conversation. I want to remind our viewers that we'd love their feedback. And we have a webinar survey to help improve our programs, which is available on your screen now, or can be filled out to the conclusion of the webinar. And I was looking for, you guys have done a really great job at fielding questions that were coming in. I want to give our audience a few minutes if there are any questions that have not been posed before we close out. Well, I think that's it. So please join me in thanking Dan Connery and Benjamin Crosby for their presentation, as well as our sponsor, Trimble Project Site. If you have any additional questions or comments that did not get fielded, please don't hesitate to click the Email Us button on the console, and we'll share those with our presenters so they can respond to you directly. Please visit enr.com/webinars for the archive of this presentation to share with your colleagues, as well as information about our upcoming events. Make sure to tune back in for tomorrow's webinar, Increasing Productivity and Margins in the Era of Forced Change, that's airing at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We hope you found this webinar to be a good investment of your time. Thank you and have a great day.